Hello everyone, Todd Shelnut here with CFI Pro Courses, and I've got something special for you through December. You may have heard through some of my other videos, but I always choose December as my recurrent month for my CFI. Now, I never let my CFI lapse. It's just something that I think is unprofessional, and I just choose not to do because I'm in the trade. Now, if I weren't in the trade, if I was doing something else and I was doing CFI on the side, I can understand where someone would let their CFI lapse. Perfectly normal, but for someone who's in the trade and practices their trade every day, I don't think there's any reason why you should ever let your CFI lapse. Now, as you probably have been studying or you've probably learned, there's multiple different ways that we can actually renew our CFI certificate. So one of the first ways, and probably one of the more common ways that you can do it, is through a FIRC, an F-I-R-C, and that stands for Flight Instructor Refresher Course or Clinic. Depends on who's advertising it. But the FIRC is clearly advertised or clearly listed in the FARs as one of the ways, and I say the FARs, I shouldn't be saying that, in CFR Part 61 as one of the ways that you can renew. Now, there's other ways you can renew. One of them is you can choose to have based off activity. So I could renew if I had signed a certain number of people off within my last time that I got my renewal, then I can do that based off activity. Now, another way that I could renew is I could renew based off my job status. So let's say that if I was working as a check airman for a 135 or a 141 or a 121, but something that revolved the regular evaluating of pilots, I could use that as a way to renew. And other than that, in the 14 CFR Part 61, the only other way that it gives in there to renew is through the process of going through the renewal checkride, and we'll get to that in just a second, because that's the way that I chose to renew this year, and I do that every other year. So every other year, I use my National Association of Flight Instructor Master Instructor Accreditation, Master Flight Instructor, and that renews that cycle. But I like to try to renew my CFI every year and not every 2 years or every 24 months, okay, before somebody comments on that. But however, I want you to know that there's actually more ways that you can actually renew. So one of the other ways that you could do it is by going into the FAA's FSIMS, Flight Standards Information Management System, and it's also called the 8900.1, and in there it gives a few more ways that you can actually renew. One is by the NAFI Master Flight Instructor, and the other one is by you participating as an instructor in the Wings program. Now, it doesn't mean that you are participating in the Wings program like you're doing the Wings courses. It means that you are the instructor on the Wings courses. So if you do so many of those courses for so many pilots within a certain time frame, you also could renew based off that. Now, that's wonderful for you because that really requires no attention on your part except to understand which one of those missions that you would like to fly. And you could just get your student to, you go out with your student that you're normally training with. Let's say if you're going through an ab initio program, then you never have to worry about it. You just say, okay, what are we going to do today? We're going to do TOLs, takeoff and landings. Okay, well, cool. Well, guess what? They have a Wings flight just for TOLs. And so let's go ahead out there and do that. And so once you do three, of course, you have to do normally 3 flights, and you do it with 5 different pilots, and that totals up to 15 items, and boom, there's your renewal. So you can also use the 8900.1 as guidance to let you know about renew. But I want to walk you through, over the next 10 days, I'm going to walk you through how I am preparing for my Checkride coming up on the 21st of December. And hopefully you'll see that even an old timer like me can get out there and brush up on what needs to be brushed up on and walk into the Checkride room with the examiner feeling fully prepared. So today I am going to be just preparing myself. So I'm going to be gathering data. I'm going to be showing you where I'm going and how I'm going to prepare. And then as we go through each day, because it's about, I think it's a little over 10 items that I have to do on the Checkride. And I'm going to be kind of covering with you the renewal process and what I'm going to be doing on my Checkride on the 21st. So stay tuned. This should be very interesting. And let's take a look at what I'm going to do to prepare myself for my Checkride coming up on the 21st. So the first thing that we want to do when we're preparing for either a renewal or a reinstatement, or even just any Checkride for that matter, is we want to go to the Airman Certification Standards or the Practical Test Standards, and we want to look over and see exactly what are we going to be doing. Now, because this is a renewal Checkride for me, and I've asked the examiner to, one of the stipulations that I always give the examiner before I do a Checkride with them, especially for a renewal, I let them know that if this is just going to be a check the box type situation, I would rather not participate, because I am actually looking to go into this Checkride and be tested and to see if I still have what it takes. So I would prefer that my Checkride be as difficult as possible. So I'm wanting very difficult questions to be asked. I'm wanting to know, do I know my trade? And this is unlike other Checkrides, especially for those who do the initial Checkride. Normally they're like, God, I really hope I don't get asked hard questions. And, I'm trying to shove all this training into a very short period of time. And there's not a lot of people out there that are studying for these CFI ratings that have like years or months to prepare. Normally they're trying to do it as quickly as possible so they can get out there and start working in their trade. But I actually want to be grilled on this to the highest extent possible. I want to have stump the chump questions. I want to have trick questions. I want everything thrown at me, including the kitchen sink. So the first thing I do is I'm going to go to my practical test standards. Now, when I go to the PTS, I just want to let you know, I don't just immediately go down and start looking at things. One of the things that I think that I can really kind of stump a lot of people on is just in the front part of the practical test standards. So as I'm preparing today, I'm going to start off with a very thorough review of some of the publications that I need to be aware of. And I'm going to start with the PTS. So as I scroll down here, the first thing that I want to make sure that I have is the most current copy of the practical test standards. And of course, this is the latest one. I know it because I went to the FAA's website. So if the examiner says to me, well, Todd, how do you know you have the most current practical test standards? And I say, well, before the Checkride, I double checked it on the FAA's website, and this is the most current one. There's not been a change that's came out since this one, because this one has up to change 6, so it's actually 6D. So good. So it's the 8081-6D, which is the PTS, change 6. Those 6s have nothing to do with one another. All right. So when I first start going down here, I'm just going to go really kind of page by page with you and show you what I'm doing to prepare. And then if you've got any questions, please post it in the comments and I can let you know the answers to any questions that you may have. So of course we can see here's a note, and I want to make sure I read all the note. So if I go down here and I look at the forward, I always read the forward. You never can read too much information in this stuff. So down here is a record of changes. So what I want to do is keep up also with the way things used to be. So if I get into an airplane as a flight instructor and someone has a LORAN, do I have to train on it? Do I have to teach it? Well, you're not going to be tested on it on the Checkride, but if you're going to train someone in an airplane and they do have LORAN in there, now LORAN for aviation has been dismantled, but LORAN for sea maritime stuff is still into effect. But if I'm training with someone and they do have a LORAN in there, because it's not a supported system within the FAA's National Airspace System, I don't have to teach it anymore. But if they did have it in their airplane and they were continuing to use it as a VFR item, I want to just go over the device with them. So I won't be tested on it, but at least I just need to know about it just for historical reasons, in my personal opinion. And then I'm going to go through every one of the changes here, and I'm just going to make sure I review every one of the changes and make sure I understand that those items no longer apply to the Checkride that I'm going to be taking. So I'm going to go through all the changes there. These are just enhancements and they're not major changes. And I'm going to go through the table of contents. Now, just know that the table of contents here, I apologize for the scrolling there. That was a very fast scroll. It's all clickable. It's not that way in the CFI PTS that the FAA has, but it is in this one, the CFI PTS. So I could actually click on a lot of these items and just go to where I want to go to. We currently, when we started, we're going to be right here on general information. So I'm just going to click right there so I can go right to it. As I look through here, I'm just going to read down through this material. You never can tell what kind of questions that you're going to be asked. This was actually a question here that I was asked on a previous CFI renewal check ride, and which the examiner said, well, where can I actually go to buy a copy? And I said, well, you go to your local pilot store. And he goes, well, let's say there's no pilot stores close to me. I live out in the middle of nowhere and there's no airports close to me, but I'm just training to be a pilot. So where could I go to do it? And I'm like, well, you could go to, one of the brand name website things. And he goes, well, does the government sell the publications? And of course, what he wanted me to do was to actually tell him about this. So if I went to this link here to the bookstore, let's see if it actually still works. Yeah, it actually still works. So you can actually go in and still buy things from the government. So anyway, isn't that cool? I always like to make sure these links and everything still work in there as well. So that's something that I thought was pretty cool. So let's go into back to where we were. So I'm glad to know that link still works. That's very interesting stuff. It is also, you can download it here on the FAA's website. Anyway, this is how I prepare. I'm just going down and I'm just reading the material just to make sure that I'm aware of how to conduct this stuff as a flight instructor, how to prepare someone for a check ride. In this particular case, I'm preparing myself for a check ride, which is kind of how training to be a CFI is. You're having to prepare yourself for a lot of the stuff because you can't have someone there to walk you through every single small item in the check ride. There's a lot of stuff that you actually have to study yourself. Anyway, so I'm going to keep going down through the standards, and I'm going to make sure that I understand what I need to do. And I know it seems like I'm being long-winded, but I'm just trying to walk you through how I prepare for this. Here's another thing that I like to do too. I have on my iPad, I use a program called GoodNotes. No, didn't mean to sponsor them in this video or anything, but what I like to do is, you can see that these ones here, they're not clickable links, but there's actually some parts in here, or some items in here that are not current. And so what I've done on my GoodNotes is I've went through and I tried to pull up each one of these items, like I would pull up this item here, AC006, Aviation Weather, and just see what the most current edition is and make a note of it if I need to. But I keep all that stuff in GoodNotes. It's kind of like where I handwrite a lot of my stuff. I'll show you a picture here in a minute what mine looks like. There it is there. You can see part of my GoodNotes. Anyway, so I've got that going there, and then I just go through each one of these here just to see if there's anything current or expired since the last time I looked at this stuff, because I want to make sure I looked at it. And it's a couple of things there, but it won't take you long to go through it just to see, what the most current edition is, and just to make sure I'm aware of all the acronyms and everything else. So it says here, the objective lists the elements that must be satisfactory. So when it says the objective, it's talking about the objective in each area of operation, in each task that we're going to look at down below in the PTS as we start to get ready. Every task has an objective, and it says that the objective lists the elements that must be satisfactory. So we will look at that. The objective includes specifically what the applicant should be able to do. So what do I have to be able to do? The conditions under which the task must be performed, and the acceptable standards. Now, it's kind of weird here because we're in the practical test standards for CFI. And so that doesn't really list any performance standards, especially when it comes to maneuvers. So a lot of the times it says that the applicant shall demonstrate instructional knowledge, and we'll get to that in just a second. But that's usually the standards. The instructor must demonstrate acceptable or instructional level of knowledge. And we're going to look what makes up that. Because I think a lot of you are going to be kind of blown away about what makes up that level of knowledge. So it says the examiner determines that the applicant meets the task objective through the demonstration of competency in all elements. And if you look down here, read on down here, it says the objective of a task that involves pilot skill, which of course is all your maneuvers and whatnot, has 4 parts. And of course, in short, it's basically everything you need to know about the maneuver, all the common errors, to be able to recognize those common errors and then be able to correct for those common errors. So each one of the tasks for most of the maneuvers, I think maybe 2 of the maneuvers don't actually have 4 parts in there because they're not really a skill. They're something that can be graded orally. And I'm going to go through and make sure know all of my abbreviations. I don't want to be out of abbreviations. And I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of abbreviations, especially in instrument, that you should know. And you can get lost in there a pretty good bit when we start talking about all the acronyms that we have in the instrument phase. So I'm just going to go down through all the acronyms, and I'm going to look at that. And then it says use of the Practical Standards book. So why do I want to use this book? What's the purpose of using this book? And this book says here that you must demonstrate instructional knowledge. And so what does that mean? Well, it says that means that the instructor applicant is capable of using the appropriate reference to provide the application or correlative level of knowledge of a subject, topic, procedure, or maneuver. And that means that you can use whatever you'd like in the Checkride in order to give the answer. Because that's what it says. The instructor applicant is capable of using the appropriate reference to provide that knowledge. A lot of examiners are, sometimes you just get these examiners that they're complete and total tools. And they're like, nope, I don't want you to open anything. You can't look at anything. It's got to be 100% by memory. And that is so asinine. That is so stupid. God, they should fire every one of those examiners that makes someone do that. That is not the way this Checkride's supposed to be done. What a bunch of idiots. And if you're an examiner watching this, you're an idiot. It's not the way to examine. That's not the way the FAA taught you to do it in school. Stop doing that. So please don't do that. But it says that you must follow the recommended discussions, explanations, and descriptions as shown in the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. Now, with that being said, it says in there that you just can't read off of a script. So if you're sitting there reading off of a PDF document to me, or if you don't know some of the tiny details, that's a problem. So I can't get into every single minute detail about what would the person ask, what would they ask. That doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to do that. So that's it with that. In preparation for the practical test, of course, the examiner must have a plan of action. But I have actually talked with the examiner. He's kind of, we went over the exam. And so I'm actually going to walk in with a plan of action myself so I can just kind of drive the Checkride, hopefully. And I can just walk through and tell him how I would work with my client in doing these particular items. So let's go on. And it says here that when we get to the special emphasis areas. So I need to go and review the special emphasis areas that I have. Now, personally for me, I have actually done extensive research when it comes to special emphasis areas. So if you actually have a copy of my book, I actually have a dedicated chapter in here which has detailed explanations on each item of the special emphasis areas. So I'm going to go over my book that I wrote, and I'm going to look over all of these items to make sure that I can talk about all of them very freely. And there may be some updated items. So as I go through each one of these 16 items, or 15 really, what I'm going to do is just kind of do a quick Google search or go to the FAA's website and just make sure there's nothing new that's popped up within the last couple of months that I need to be aware of. So again, when we're looking through here, here's the practical test prerequisites. This is another question that I've been asked before, like, Todd, how do you know that the person's ready to take the check rides, or what's the prerequisites? And I say, well, I can either go to the regs under 91-183 for my CFI ride, I can go to 123 for the commercial, 103 for the private, and so on and so on. And I can just go down through that list. Or in each testing standard, whether it be an ACS or a practical test standard, it actually gives a complete list of the items that are all the prerequisites as well. So I can choose to use that. It says an applicant holding a flight instructor certificate who applies for an additional rating on that certificate required by 14 CFR to do this. So that's not me, so I don't have to worry about that. Aircraft and equipment required for the practical test. I need to make sure that I read this because this is one of those stump the chump questions. What if someone brings a foreign aircraft to the check ride? You know, can you do a check ride in it? That type of stuff. So I just look over all this and look through the regulatory guidance that it gives there. Flight instructor responsibility. Well, I don't have a flight instructor signing me off for this check ride, but I'm also going to read through this because I'm preparing myself for this check ride. So this is kind of like my responsibility, even though I'm the applicant. So I'm actually going to go through this stuff as well because it states that this is what I must do to prepare someone for the check ride. So even though I am not required to be tested on Area of Operation 1, which is Fundamentals of Instruction, I still have to have some FOI knowledge on this test because it says able to make practical application of the fundamentals of instructing, and it doesn't say whether this is initial or or any other type of check ride. So I need to make sure that I'm clever on that and that I can do all of these items here. And I'm just going to read on down for you as well. The examiner responsibility, what the examiner is required to do. And there is a list in here, which is a pretty good, I think a pretty good way of really kind of preparing yourself about what you're really going to be examined on. And as I'm reading down through here, I always like to read through these 9 items. And I like to ask myself, can I do all of this stuff? So it says the practical test is passed if, in the judgment of the examiner, the applicant demonstrates satisfactory performance in regards to knowledge of the FOIs. So I want to make sure that I stay up on the FOIs. I think I'm above average on the FOIs. So I love the FOIs. I embrace the FOIs. And I think I'm pretty much above average on technical subject areas. So I don't really worry about that. But I do like to revisit my lesson plans every now and then. Knowledge of the flight instructor's responsibilities concerning pilot certification process. Again, that's a FOI thing. Knowledge of the flight instructor responsibilities concerning logbook entries and pilot certificate endorsements. That is also a FOI thing as well as a PTS thing, as well as a regulatory thing as well. Knowledge of the flight instructor's responsibilities conveying the applicant runway incursion mitigation technique. And every check ride you take, you'll always have to go through runway incursions. Number 6, ability to demonstrate the procedures and maneuvers selected by the examiner to at least the commercial pilot skill level while giving effective instruction. So I will make sure that before I actually go out on my flight for the check ride on the 21st, that I do go out and rent a plane and do a little once over just to make sure that I'm not a complete and total idiot. Number 7, competence in teaching and procedures and maneuvers selected by the examiner. So I'm going to make sure that I review all of the maneuvers and all of the standards, and I'm just going to say them a couple of times to myself between now and the check ride. Probably once a day, I'll just go through all the maneuvers and the tolerances for those. Number 8, competence in describing, recognizing, analyzing, and correcting common errors. So I probably, in order to prepare for that, I probably want to sit either in a sim with somebody or maybe try to see if I can get on take someone's student for a lesson and just kind of go out and just practice on being an instructor because I don't do it that much anymore in the plane. And lastly, and not least, and God, this is one that can really bite you in the butt, knowledge of the development and effective use of a course of training, a syllabus, and a lesson plan. It's really unique that I'm reading this today because I actually had someone reach out to me and stating that they had received a notice of disapproval on their check ride because they did not walk into the check ride with a course of training. Basically, they wanted them to have a syllabus they wanted to look at their syllabus for a private pilot training. So a course of training there, syllabus. and the applicant didn't have it in hand and wasn't able to produce it, and so it resulted in a notice of disapproval. I think that is really, really, really far out, because if you didn't have a syllabus when you walked into the Checkride, I would definitely ask you, because it's in the FOIs, I would just ask you to describe to me how you would design a course of training or a syllabus or a lesson plan. So you have to have the knowledge to be able to do these three things in the Checkride, to be able to effectively use a course of training, a syllabus, and a lesson plan, which means that if you walk into the Checkride without lesson plans, how can you actually tell me that you know how to use a lesson plan if you don't have lesson plans? So you've got to know how to use lesson plans, okay? So here are the unsatisfactory performance. This is going to be some of the things that you should know in big, bold print right here. God, I go over this about once or twice a month in my current job, in examiners discontinuing or stopping a test without the consent of the applicant. Or they're continuing a test. It says, excuse me, what I meant to say was they're continuing the test without the consent of the applicant. So it says that after the Checkride, after the examiner has notified the applicant that they've failed the Checkride, the examiner cannot just stop it. They actually have to ask them, say, look, at this particular point, you're not meeting the standards. So this, your actions have resulted in a notice of disapproval. What would you like to do? Would you like to continue, or would you like to go back to the airport? And that says right here that the examiner has to do that. Okay. And, God, man, I tell you another thing examiners do. It says when a notice of disapproval is issued, the examiner must record the applicant's unsatisfactory in terms of the areas of operation and specific tasks not being met. I'm going to tell you, if the FAA was really to look at some of these notice of disapprovals, the applicant would have a very, very short recheck on a lot of these things, because a lot of times the examiners don't know how to fill out a notice of disapproval. If you walk into a Checkride and you failed off of the first thing that they asked you, say it was airworthiness, then you have the entire Checkride to do, which means that on that notice of disapproval, every single area of operation that's on the rest of the Checkride must be listed in the body section of the notice of disapproval, because it says upon reexamination, the applicant will be reexamined on the following items. And a lot of times they'll just put like one item there, or sometimes they'll even put what they failed in. And that's the only thing that they'll put is what they failed in, which means that when they come back, technically, they only are supposed to be examined on that one item. But whatever. I mean, it's just, people not doing their job correctly. So what can you do about that? That's the reason why I'm trying to teach you how to do a little bit better. If you get what is the difference between because it's kind of a difference here. So you have a notice of disapproval, or an NOD, and it's kind of confusing because right here in the task area right here, it will say that, well, let's see here where it says it. Oh, right up here in the front up here. It says if the test is discontinued, and it's talking about unsatisfactory performance, but it used the words discontinued. If the last test is discontinued, the applicant is entitled credit only for those area of operation associated tasks that you satisfactorily performed. But then if you go down here, you get a letter of discontinuance, and it seems very so a LOD and an NOD are two different things, even though they use the word discontinuance both. Yeah, so letter of discontinuance, notice of discontinuance, the same thing. So a LOD can be issued anytime that there's a need for a discontinuance, and normally it centers around three things. It's either you're sick, so it's an illness, a problem with the airman, there is a problem with the weather, or there's a problem with the aircraft. Other than that, the Checkride is supposed to continue to go. And according to the FAA, the examiner's never, ever, ever supposed to start a Checkride if they know when they walk in the door that they're not going to be able to complete it. So for an examiner to walk in the door and do just the oral portion of a Checkride is against what the FAA teaches. They're not supposed to do that. We have examiners do it all the time. It's just one of those things that's shoved underneath the rug. You will be forced to talk about ADM. You will have to talk about single pilot resource management. Applicants use a checklist. If you don't use a checklist, use of distractions. A DPE will try to distract you. A positive exchange of flight controls. You've got to be able to say that there. It says it in the standards that you have to give that there. Initial flight instructor certification. This does not involve me, so I'm going to go on past that. But this does. So this is me here, what I'm going to be doing. And it says that Part 61 allows an individual that holds a flight instructor certificate to renew or reinstate that certificate by passing a practical test. The examiner shall develop a plan of action that includes areas of operation of at least the minimum number of tasks prescribed in the table. So let's go to the table. I'm going to scroll down here, and we're going to look at some more items. So here we're getting into the single engine. This is only for the single engine. At the bottom of this is for the multi-engine. And so here's our first table. So this first table here is for an additional rating. That's not me. I'm not adding a helicopter instructor or a glider instructor or anything like that to my existing instructor certificates. So this does not apply to me, but the next table does. And it says, this is a renewal or reinstatement of a flight instructor table airplane single engine. And as you notice, area of operation 1 is not in here, so I don't have to do FOIs, although they can be integrated within these items. And so here are the items that I have to do. Bravo, Mike, and one other task. So Bravo is runway incursions, Mike is logbook endorsements, and one other task, I don't know what it is, so I got to look over all of them. 3, I've got to pick one task from there, and so on and so on. And as you can see, here's the lineup for my Checkride. And so I know for a fact that my runway incursion and my logbook endorsements, that better pop, because I know that I'm going to do it. It says it right here that I'm going to be able to do it, and my takeoff and landings better pop, because I know that I'm going to have to do that. But the rest of the stuff, I don't know what I'm going to do, so I have to kind of study everything. Okay. I don't have cross category, but I do have cross class, so I'm able to do multi-engine instructing, single engine instructing, and instrument instructing. And so one of the questions that may be asked is, well, if you go out and can you renew just your CFI or just your MEI? And the answer is yes, you can do that. So if I do that, does it renew the rest of them? And that answer is right here. It says that the renewal or reinstatement of one rating on a flight instructor certificate renews or reinstates all privileges existing on the certificate. So that's where that's listed there. All right, cool. So when I walk into the Checkride, now I have my own list of items that I use to walk into a Checkride that I prep with. I have a certain way of setting the room up so that the examiner will not be inconvenienced. I want everything right in front of them. I like to talk with them the day or two prior to make sure I have everything ready and to go in case they want me to do like a nav log or get their weights and things like that. So I make sure every bit of this stuff is checked off as I go into the Checkride. And sometimes I even take this with me. It just makes it look a little bit sharper that they know that I know that I'm getting everything ready. Okay, so that's that table there. And then in here is what the examiner would be using to walk himself or herself through the Checkride. And they would just write some data on here, and they would just check off what they asked as they go down through. Okay, so the rest of the items here that I'm going to be going through are going to be just through each one of the areas of operation. Of course, you know that I already have videos on runway incursions and on logbook endorsements, on a lot of things that are on the Checkride already. You can either find those on my YouTube or over on my Patreon account. But so today, I'm going to spend the rest of my day just walking through the rest of the documents that I need to be able to prep for this Checkride. Now, what are the documents, Todd, that you're going to be looking for? Well, looking into. Well, I've already told you what they are. So let's go back up to the top here and let's look at the list that I'm going to be looking at to prepare myself for the Checkride. And that is this. So as I walk through every one of these items, it says these practical test standards are based on the following references. So as I go through today, which is going to be my job on this Sunday, I'm going to go through each one of these items, and I'm just going to skim and or scan through each one. And I want to make sure I have everything ready to go. I did buy, normally I don't use a paper FAR AIM And the reason why I call it a FAR aim is because that's what it says on the front, FAR aim. But I actually did go back out and buy a 2022, even though technically it's not 2022, and this is not really kind of pertinent until January 1st. But in true fashion with what I do, I went out and bought the 2022 FAR aim, and of course I split it in two. So there it is. And I bind each one, so I have my aim, and I've already started to tab some of that stuff out as I'm going through the aim, and then I'll start tabbing out my FAR aim as well. And I do it digitally, and I do it paper-wise. Why? Because I'm stupid like that. I like to be overly prepared. I don't like to be underprepared when I go into this stuff, because I take this stuff incredibly serious. And so when I walk in there, the examiner knows I take this stuff very seriously, and I've already briefed him, and I said, look, I don't want to easy go, man. I really want to. I want you to test me, test my skills, you know. So I'm prepping everything, I'm getting everything ready, and I'm going to walk you through for the next 10 days what I'm doing, and hopefully some of the things that I'm doing can prepare you for your upcoming practical test, whether it be a renewal or a reinstatement or whatever it is. Hey, look, I thank you for listening to me just babble on here, but I don't know, maybe some of this stuff will assist you. But this is only day one. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend and a great upcoming week. And I'm going to be posting for the next 10 days straight. And we're going to make sure that you understand exactly what I'm doing to prepare. And then hopefully this will help you out prepare. I'm Todd Shelnut with CFI Pro Courses. I look forward to seeing you at the airport and maybe one day on a check ride. Take care.